Hey, how's it going, folks? This is Hellbent and welcome to AutoHotkey Functions tutorial number 4. In this one we're going to be looking at static variables and how we can use them. So what is a static variable? Well, it's basically a kind of like a local variable, like most variables that you declare inside of a function. Their scope is local within that function. Usually when you're done with it, that variable is done with. It's frees up its memory. It doesn't need to be used anymore. Each time you call it or use it within a function, it'll get reset. So for example, I create a function. I declare a variable called I, and then I use that throughout the function. And the next time that that function gets called again, I will get reset again to be basically like as if it's a brand new variable. Well, what happens if you want a variable within the function to be persistent from one time that you call the function to the next time, to the next time, to the next time, to the next time? So the simplest way to do a demonstration on this, now I rarely ever need to use static variables. I personally like to use global variables. Don't tell people, they don't like it when you say that you use global variables, but I'd rather use global variables. Shh, mum's the word, okay? All right. So I'm going to create a function called myFunction. I'm not going to be passing any arguments to it. Inside of this, I'm just going to create a regular local variable. So its scope, the things that can see it, access it, etc., are inside of this function. So this variable is called counter. And I'm going to set it to a value of 0. Then the only other thing that my function is going to do is going to return the value of counter with 1 added to it. Now, in order to return the counter with 1 added to it, you might have seen before like things like I++, J++, J minus minus, counter plus plus, counter minus minus. Well, if I'm doing that in this same line with the return, it wouldn't add that 1 to it until after it's already finished returning. So what I need to do in order for it to actually return in the same line, 1 being added to counter, I need to put the plus plus or minus minus before the word counter or before the variable's name. So plus plus counter. So in this case, it's going to return a 1 in this case, but if I had put this plus plus over here, it would return a 0. And then on the next, now obviously there is no next line here, but on this next line, if I looked at the value of counter, counter would equal 1. But in this line here, if I try to return it, it still equals 0 if I put the plus plus right here, like that. This would return a 0, whereas if there was still another line here, which there's not because it's returning, but if there was, it would see a 1 for counter. But like I said, I want to return with that 1 already added onto it. To call up this function and do it repeatedly over and over again, I'm just going to use a hotkey. I'm going to use number pad 1. And in the last episode for functions, I showed you how you can call up functions within a message box, etc., etc. So this time we're going to just do it inside of a tooltip. And all we're going to do is just call up my function. And the thing that's going to get displayed is the returned value for my function. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So if I press number pad 1, we should get a number returned. That number should be 1. And now what I really want is I want that when I run that function again, I want it to take counter and add to it again. But that's not going to happen because each time I run it, it's going to reset counter back to 0. So each time it returns a 1. Over and over and over. Well, I have 2 ways I can get around this. One is outside of here, up in the auto execute area or somewhere else, I can create a global variable called counter. And I could set it to a value of 0 here, and then inside of here I'm not declaring that counter variable over and over and over again. But that's not really, I don't really want to do that. I want to have a variable that's just for this function. It can only be seen by this function, but I still want it to remember what it was before. So to do that, I can create a static variable, so that way what that does is once I declare it, it's not going to declare itself again over and over and over again. So it's once it declares itself that first time, that's it. I can add to it, I can subtract to it, I can actually change it back to 0, but in a different way. So let's just go ahead and create a static. So I just said static and then the variable's name, and I gave it a value. I don't even actually have to give it a value here. I can do that on the next line or lines after that, etc., etc. Okay, so now I've created this static counter, and now once this variable is created, it's going to live for the full length of my program. So even though this is the first line of the function, and I'm going to be calling this function over and over and over again, it's only going to set this once. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8, 9, 10. So there we go. We have it. Now what if I do actually want it to be set back to 0? So let's create a condition that maybe I want to set it back to 0. So I'm going to say, well, maybe if counter equals 10, then counter equals 0. Is this going to work? What do you think? Do you think this is going to work? I think it's going to work, right? Because we're not declaring it we're not using this static variable to create this variable called counter anymore. We're just manipulating this variable that is static. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I press it one more time, is it going to go to 11 or is it going to go to 1? It's going to either be 11 or a 1. What do you think? Place your bets. Place your bets. Here we go. 11 or a 1? It's a 1 because it reset the counter back to 0. All right. I think that's as good of a definition of what a static variable is that I can give. Just like other local variables within a function, if I was to do something else, so other functions can't see what that is. So for example, I'm going to add a new line, and I'm going to try to display whatever counter is. What do you think? Do you think I'm going to be able to see what counter is, or do you think I'm going to have blank? Here, I'll add something after it. So counter is supposed to come before the word here, but what do you think? Do you think there's going to be something? Do you think there's going to be something here on the tooltip, or do you think you're just going to see the word here? Let's see. All we see is the word here, right? Because this variable, it's still only local within this function. So other things, I can create as many functions as I want, and I can use this variable counter for each and every single one of them. But each and every single one of them, that counter is a completely different variable because they can only see what's in that function. Things that I covered in past functions tutorial. Anyways, that's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you found this useful. Like I said, I rarely ever use static variables. You're probably rarely ever going to use static variables, but now you know. If you didn't know about it before, now you know about it and you can start using it. Peace.